People who born deaf, how's your inner voice sound? Or you just speak sign langue in your head? I asked my niece this. She said she had an inner voice, but it was more a feeling than a voice. She described it as feeling the vibrations from loud music. When she had her surgery and she heard voices for the first time, her inner voice adapted. I've heard something similar from someone. They said it liked the vibrations of music, or just with any sound that is. The only sound she could hear her head were just that. Not deaf, but my brother is. I remember when we were in our teens on a family vacation and I caught him signing to himself when he was bored. The first time I saw it I thought he was telling me something, but I noticed he wasn't making eye contact and it made no sense. That is when I realized he was thinking to himself. After that, my family and I wouldn't watch when we noticed him doing it, since we figured it wasn't fair to know what he was thinking at times when the same couldn't be said for him. My mom is profoundly deaf and I asked her this same question. Totally not a stupid question. She said she thinks in ASL. I have caught her signing to herself just like I sometimes talk to myself. For the first 5 years of my life I was technically deaf. I couldn't hear anything. I remember thinking by closing my eyes and imagining the thing I wanted to think. So I would close my eyes and see my own imaginary world. I can still do it, but only in complete silence. It's a trait I will forever hold, but I'm not mad at it. It can be very helpful in some situations. Man, it's absolutely amazing to me that people don't think up entire worlds in HD when they think. Like that's the only way I think. Hi, born profound deaf person here. Sorry for the long post OMGO. Before I got surgery for my cochlear implant before learning ASL, I don't exactly recall knowing about any mental functionalities like using a thinking voice. Most of my mental uses were reimagining images and visual thoughts. If I wanted a hot dog, I'd visualize a hot dog. Besides that, my dreams were like silent films, and 95% still often are silent even after my surgery to help me hear. After that and being able to hear for some years, at some point, I developed an inner voice which just doesn't have any clear vocal sound to it, yet, at the same time, does. Kinda weird, hard to explain. It's a jump between muffled speaking sound as I think and hollow echoes for my normal thinking voice, and when I read fiction with characters. For those who have preset voice tirade, imagine them in my head as to how they would act it out and it would sound just like the tone I'd hear from the media they're from. For the stories that aren't adapted into any audio format, I make them up in my head and try to make them sound distinct if I felt like it. Haha. My friends, non-CI, have told me they either don't mentally see hear anything at all and have no idea the concept I'm trying to explain, or they visualize floating hands signing to them in their mind space. I don't think in the latter at all, except when there are signs I'm trying to remember reference. Also, side note BTW, back to my dreams thing. I sometimes dream them with semi-transparent CC subtitles hovering what I'm seeing. Sometimes at the bottom or near people's heads like in some video games, just without the speech bubbles, or none at all. But my dreaming brain narrates my dreams to me, telling me info somehow. IDK if that's a deaf thing though. But I've always found how I dream kind of fascinating. The very rare sounds I hear in my dreams is kind of hard to explain as well. I can't tell if they were close to authentic to a deaf person with hearing that my brain produced for my dream, or just my brain trying to reimagine the sound in my mental voice while I dream, but it felt like there was legit real sound to it, but on the disorienting surreal side. This was so informative and interesting to read. I'm not the OP, but thank you for sincerely answering the question. Adifi here. Naturally we can't even describe what it sounds like as we don't really understand sound in the way you do. Maybe the basics like deep and high pitches, but the difference between notes or octaves are something only understood through theory, that is, reading about them. We don't understand what makes a singer good, but we for sure know how to tell if it's a good beat, provided it's loud enough to feel. As such, speaking for myself here, my inner voice is more literally like thinking. A mixture of instinctual understanding and the words that describe the meaning I want to express. I am a writer, so words are quite colorful to me. They convey a myriad of imagination. I also am a philosopher, so I admire and observe closely the metaphysics at play here. Words can occasionally come out in English as it is best expressed through English. Some come out as sign language as there are sayings that only make sense in sign language. It's a blend of both as well as the raw emotional output that form my thoughts. Also, there is the silence in between the thoughts. Depends on how much you pay attention, I suppose. Was born profoundly deaf. Wore hearing aids from 6 months old and replaced it with a cochlear implant at 15. I only have one. Don't hear out of the other ear unless I opt to get another one for bilateral hearing. I was never taught how to sign. I was raised in a hearing world. People don't even realize I'm deaf most of the time until they see the implant. I'm a bit of an outlier, I guess. I'm not involved in the deaf community, though I do have a couple of deaf friends who both talk and sign. My voice sounds a lot cooler in my head than what it really is. Probably the same for most people, lol. I think your last statement is spot on. I'm not sure why people are making fun of you. It's a legitimate question and I hope someone deaf can explain. But most thoughts we have are conceptual and they're not in words. So if they don't have an inner voice, I don't think they're missing much. But I have no idea if that's the case. I recently learned that deaf people, at least in my country, often speak sign language as their first language and do not appreciate the assumption that sign language is just a signed form of the country's language. The two languages usually have different grammars and morphology. I think your question is very interesting, OP. I just wanted to add to it, maybe this helps understand that not everyone has an acoustic language as their inner voice. I think it's hard for a hearing person to grasp this concept because language is so bound to sound for us, but as Steven Pinker said, we shouldn't make the mistake of mixing up thought and language. Most of our thoughts are more diffuse than language. Not deaf. However, a coda, child of deaf adult. Sign language was my first fluent language, and I didn't learn to speak until kindergarten. Anyways, my inner voice thoughts are spoken English. However, the one thing that's in sign language is spelling. Whenever I have to spell something, in my mind I process it in sign language. I also physically sign it discreetly with my hand to my side. I think it stuck with me because as a child I was often fingerspelling words I didn't know. I'm not deaf, but when I was learning ASL I began to think in ASL where essentially I could feel the muscle memory of the signs in my head. For example, without actually moving. Think about what it feels like to raise your hand, clench a fist, or write with a pencil. That mental sensation of a recalled muscle movement was how ASL thoughts felt to me. Dunno if this is the same for deaf people, but I found it super intriguing when it started happening to me. I'm a coder, so I have deaf parents and sign language was my first language, but I'm fully hearing. This is most definitely the closest way of describing it. It's not visualizing a physical hand, it's a feeling. There's a certain quality behind each thought. Fun fact, I am not deaf or born deaf, but I've recently learned that not everybody, even with intact hearing, has this voice in their head. I was baffled as I always thought everyone has a voice if they're thinking. Obligatory, not me, but here, my mom's doctorate is deaf education and literacy, and my twin brother was born with massive hearing loss that wasn't well identified until we were toddlers. So I grew up in a DHH, deaf or hard of hearing, household, surrounded by a very active deaf community in Chicago, while I had hearing but my brother had trouble. Interestingly, we both needed similar speech therapy, though his was more intense and probably fruitful. From my mom and prior experiences, I've learned a fair bit that might help answer your question, including, not every person born deaf doesn't subvocalize. See, if hearing isn't fully lost, for example, someone can be legally deaf without actually having no hearing, or people might have younger interventions, allowing a simpler period of language acquisition and development. People with limited or much reduced hearing often subvocalize less crisply in their head, and they often don't have a consistent voice internally because that's not how their brain learns to identify most language. Some have said they see signs, while another older student of my mom claimed to see written language instead, though this is purely anecdotal. The voice in your head is that subvocalization, which is often reduced in those with hearing loss. In fact, you need to remember that before you had language, you still had thoughts. They just weren't organized the same. Language provided greater ability to organize and understand even your own thoughts, and the deaf and hard of hearing are the same. In fact, Many signers in my country, USA, have stated that they think in signs, ASL American Sign Language, or finger spelling. People whose deafness comes later in life will tend to keep cervicalizing, and even their muscles will react to the mental speech, minor jaw movement, tongue movement, etc., despite their loss of hearing. This is widely claimed to be a result of information processing and memory, and because of how they've learned to think. Hopefully that helps. For those who are born hard of hearing, they might develop an internal voice, or might just communicate in their head via ASL or signs, while most fully deaf people state that they don't have that same internal voice subvocalizing verbally, but think in visuals or signs. The way we conceptualize thought differs from person to person. Some people have inner monologues, some people don't. I imagine deaf people are more likely to not have an inner monologue. Not deaf but have studied psychology. People born deaf who also suffer from auditory hallucinations tend to not hear voices. They rather see floating hands speaking to them in sign language. I just remembered this fact because of your post, even though it's not an answer to your question in any way. I have follow-up question related to this. Do people who are born deaf pronounce the words they read in their head, or do you simply see the word and imagine something related to it? Not sure how to put it in words correctly. I don't pronounce them, just process them as I see them. My girlfriend said she has never heard any voice in her head except for mine, which I blame on her being sappy AF, but you never know. That's sweet AF. I have read that their dreams have people make hand signs, so I guess their mind voice will also be more physical based. I once learned a new language with unique script due to necessity. To increase practice I would mentally write the word I hear to acclimate what letters are there in the word. 10 years hence, even now though I don't use that language that much, when someone speaks words I make a mental picture of writing those words. Not sure if those are related, but thought that's how it would work. Deaf profound hear. Did surgery on right ear at 2. Later left ear at 14 or so. I have inner voice whole time. Never ASL. I learned basic of ASL in high school. So not surprised. Consider I start hearing sound when very young. It's a good question. I supposed it's related to how we was raised. If we was raised doing ASL, then we might ASL in our head. Otherwise voice. Totally different sense, but maybe checking our aphantasia can give you some perspective about us who can't imagine visuals, what I'd imagine a blind person also could not do intentionally. I'm profoundly deaf and got a cochlear implant at the age of 2 and was raised oral, didn't learn British Sign Language till about 11 years old-ish. I do have an inner voice because I have spoken since the age of 3, so basically had a similar start as a hearing person almost, I'm guessing. And I've always loved reading when growing up, so always been very literate. Not like some deaf people who are native BSL users. Usually, but obviously can't speak for all. Although I do speak better than I can hear, if that makes sense. So my inner voice is pretty much my voice, but as I have started to wear my cochlear implant considerably less, like almost never, my voice is slightly different. A bit more distorted. But I still think in words and have a voice narrating my thoughts. My dream is a mixture of speaking and just pure visuals, although I haven't really remembered my dreams all that much recently. I have a circle of deaf friends and their experiences really do vary. I will ask my partner, who is also deaf, to post her experiences on this post too. Hi, I'm deaf and I mainly think in sign language. It feels like I'm actually signing, but no, it's all in my head. Sort of phantom signing? But yeah, it's interesting. Wow, people feel like being buttholes today. I've always wondered this question myself. It's not a dumb question, it's legit. I wanna know too. There was a discussion on another sub the other day that not everyone has an inner voice. Those who have one, like me, cannot fathom not having one. And those who didn't thought it sounded weird and creepy, like you were possessed. Apparently they think in images and not words. Most of these people are not deaf. Born profoundly deaf ear, used hearing aids for the first 20 or so years of life, and also used American Sign Language. Since I was able to use hearing aids and get a general idea of what words and phrases sound like, my inner voice speaks. However, when I dream, it's a combination of both spoken language and ASL. Sometimes my dreams are even subtitled. Growing up watching TV with the captions and subtitles on all the time had an effect, I guess. I asked my niece this. She said she had an inner voice, but it was more a feeling than a voice. She described it as feeling the vibrations from loud music. When she had her surgery and she heard voices for the first time, her inner voice adapted. Great question. Would have to check back later to see if anyone answered you. 50% of the population doesn't have an inner voice and sees everything in picture. So let's say somebody wants to go and get milk. I'll say it out loud in my head. Other people will see themselves getting milk. Maybe deaf people have that. You just blew my mind. I never considered that not everyone would have an inner voice. I can't imagine forming complex thoughts without an inner voice. I just never considered it. I'll have to try asking people around me. If you are new to the channel, you can subscribe. I publish new videos every day. Until then, check another video. Bye for now.